How dare you?
Father, stop!
The first thing people noticed wasn't the slap. It was the silence that followed. 900 guests, crystal chandeliers, champagne frozen mid-air in 1,000 raised glasses. And then, the sound of skin against skin, echoing off marble walls built with the people's money. President Adewale's open palm had landed across the face of a young man in oil-stained overalls. A young man who did not belong in that hall. "You had the audacity," the president thundered, his voice shaking the chandeliers, "to touch my daughter." The young man lowered his head. He did not apologize. He did not fight back. He simply absorbed the humiliation the way he had once absorbed the weight of a stalled engine, quietly, on his own shoulders. Beside him, the president's daughter, Zara, stepped forward, tears carving lines through her makeup. "No, father. He was only trying to save me." Nobody believed her. The politicians exchanged smirks behind their glasses. The diplomats whispered. A senator's wife laughed into her husband's ear. After all, how could the daughter of the most powerful man on the continent possibly love the son of a roadside mechanic? Little did any of them know. The same man they mocked that night would one day save the president's life, expose the largest financial conspiracy in the nation's history, and become one of Africa's youngest billionaires. But on that evening, under those chandeliers, he was nothing. He was only the mechanic. 3 months earlier, every front page carried the same headline: President announces daughter's engagement to tycoon's son. The groom-to-be was Damien Okonkwo, young, handsome, tailored in Italian suits, heir to a business empire that stretched across 4 countries. The nation called him the perfect husband. Magazines called him Africa's most eligible bachelor. Only one person knew the truth behind the smile: Zara. Behind Damien's charm lived a different man, a man whose nights dissolved into private clubs, whose pupils were rarely his own size, whose temper had once shattered a bottle at a waiter's face and was quietly buried under a payout and a non-disclosure agreement. Every scandal erased, every witness paid, every headline killed before print. When Zara tried to warn her father, he waved her off like smoke. "You'll learn to love him. Marriage is about responsibility, not childish emotion." "But father," "I have made my decision." The door closed on the conversation the way it always did: final, absolute, presidential. One rainy afternoon, Zara did something she hadn't done in months. She slipped past her security detail, took the keys to her own SUV, and drove alone. No convoy, no sirens, no eyes. For 30 glorious minutes, she was simply a woman on a road, not a president's daughter. Then, the engine coughed. Smoke curled from the bonnet. The SUV rolled to a dead stop on a lonely stretch of highway outside Lagos. No signal on her phone, no headlights behind her, just rain, darkness, and the sound of bushes rustling nearby. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. "Madame," the tallest one smiled, slow and wrong, "need help." Every instinct in Zara's body screamed at once. "I'll be fine," she said, backing toward the door cab. He blocked her path. "You're too beautiful to be stranded alone." Her hand found the door handle. Locked. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She was, for the first time in her sheltered life, completely alone and completely unprotected. Then, a voice cut through the rain. "She said she'll be fine." A young man walked out of the darkness, toolbox in hand, sandals slapping against wet asphalt. Grease stained his forearms. His shirt clung to broad shoulders, but it was his eyes, calm, unshaken, almost bored by the danger, that made the thugs pause. "Leave her alone." The tallest man laughed. "And if we don't?" The young man set down his toolbox, picked up a heavy wheel spanner, and said nothing else. The fight lasted less than a minute. Years of wrestling stubborn engine blocks had built a strength in his arms that no gym could replicate. One thug went down clutching his ribs, the others fled into the bush, cursing. Breathing hard, Zara stared at her rescuer. "You saved me." He smiled, almost shy now that the danger had passed. "My father says if you can repair an engine, you can repair someone's bad day too." She laughed, a real laugh, the first in weeks. "I'm Zara." "Tunde." He popped the bonnet, hands moving with practiced certainty through the tangle of wires and metal. Minutes later, damaged fuel relay, common on these models when the wiring overheats. "You know luxury cars?" "I studied mechanical engineering." She blinked. "You did?" "First class." "So why?" He smiled, the kind of smile that carried no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. "You know how it is around here. No jobs. Thousands of graduates, hundreds of us with first-class honors, driving Okadas or fixing engines just to eat. So I came home to learn from the greatest engineer I know." "Your lecturer?" "My father." His father's workshop stood beneath an old mango tree at the edge of a dusty T-junction. No hydraulic lifts, no diagnostic computers, only calloused hands, decades of instinct, and a reputation for honesty that traveled farther than any advertisement. "A degree teaches theories," the old man told her, wiping grease from his palms. "These hands teach reality." Zara drove home that night unharmed, but something had lodged itself in her chest that she couldn't shake loose. Weeks passed. She kept returning, sometimes with a manufactured excuse about her car, sometimes with food wrapped well in luxurious plates, sometimes simply to sit beneath the mango tree to watch and listen to a father and son laugh after battling a stubborn carburetor or engine block. She had never witnessed such pure happiness that money didn't buy. One evening, she asked Tunde, almost testing him, "Don't you ever feel ashamed working here?" Tunde looked genuinely surprised. "Ashamed of what?" "This, all of it." He wiped his hands slowly. "I would rather wear honest grease than dishonest perfume." The words followed her home. They followed her into her dreams. Damien was not a man who tolerated being ignored. He had already hired a private investigator to shadow Zara's every move, an insurance policy for a fiancé who trusted nothing and no one. Weeks later, the photographs arrived in a manila envelope. The president's daughter, laughing, drinking coconut water beside a shirtless mechanic, wiping sweat from his brow. Damien's jaw tightened as he flipped through them one by one. "No one," he said quietly to his assistant, "no one humiliates me." Back at the presidential villa, the president noticed a change in Zara's face, a lightness that had been missing for months. "You seem happier." "I am." "Good," he smiled, completely misreading the source. "I take it you've accepted your future." "I've accepted something," she said carefully. He heard only what he wanted to hear. Days later, Damien followed her himself. He arrived at the workshop just as Tunde was locking the gate, stepping out of his imported car with 2 bodyguards trailing him like shadows. "So," he removed his sunglasses slowly, theatrically, "you're the grease boy." Tunde remained still. "Can I help you?" "Do you know who I am?" "No. And I don't need to, because you will never, never stand where I stand." The bodyguards chuckled. Damien didn't. The slap came fast, sharp, humiliating, a sound that would echo again months later under much brighter chandeliers. "Leave my woman alone," Damien barked like a toothless dog. Tunde didn't raise his fist. He simply looked back at him, unshaken. "My father taught me never to hit an angry fool, but he also taught me never to become one. Damian's face twisted with rage as his men pulled him back towards the car. "This isn't over." "No," Tunde replied, watching the tail light disappear into the dark. That night, Zara confessed everything to her father, who was curious as to how happy she had become. "I met someone else, father. I think I'm in love with him. His name is Tunde." The president exploded. "A mechanic? An engineer? He repairs cars. He repairs them honestly, which is more than I can say for the man you've chosen for me. I forbid this nonsense." For the first time in her life, Zara did not lower her eyes. "I respect and love you a lot, Dad. You know I do. But this time, I'm not asking for permission." The family war that followed was silent but brutal. Security officers began trailing Zara's every step. Everywhere she went, a guard was secretly assigned to follow her. Tunde's father's workshop, 30 years standing under that same mango tree, was bulldozed overnight over a fabricated permit violation. Loyal customers received quiet phone calls warning them away. Banks that had once smiled at Tunde's father suddenly rejected every loan application, every overdraft, every appeal. Still, neither Tunde or Zara surrendered. Love, for them, became an act of rebellion. Months later, under a borrowed canopy, with only a pastor, a handful of loyal friends, and Tunde's aging, weary-eyed parents present, they married in secret. No cameras, no senators, no presidential seal. Just two people and a promise that no bulldozer could flatten. The president refused to attend. He sat alone in his study that evening, staring at an empty chair, telling himself his silence was principle, not pain. Life afterward was hard in ways Zara had never imagined. Tunde repaired engines by day and filled notebooks by lamplight at night, sketching ideas for something bigger. A belief that Africa was hemorrhaging billions importing vehicle components that could be built cheaper and better on its own soil. One evening, Zara found him surrounded by diagrams of vehicles that didn't yet exist. "What are you building?" "A future," he said, without looking up. While Tunde built quietly, Damian unraveled loudly. Cocaine, illegal gambling dens, debts owed to men who did not send polite reminders. To dig himself out, he partnered with a network of international fraudsters, constructing an elaborate fake investment consortium promising the kind of foreign infrastructure funding that could transform a nation overnight. Their target was the biggest one available, the presidency itself. Months later, President Adewale stood before national television cameras, beaming, announcing a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure agreement that would, he promised, modernize roads, ports, and power grids within 5 years. The nation celebrated, the stock market surged, editorial pages called it visionary. Only one man, quietly researching manufacturing policy documents in a dim workshop office, noticed something wrong buried inside the fine print. Tunde read the investment proposal 3 times before his stomach turned cold. The listed foreign partner companies barely existed beyond shell registrations filed weeks earlier. The bank guarantees carried forged letterheads he recognized from a fraud case studied in his final year coursework. The projected returns were mathematically impossible, the kind of numbers a first-year finance student would flag in seconds. He spent 3 sleepless nights cross-referencing filings, tracing shell companies through offshore registries, building a case no one had asked him to build. Then he requested a meeting with the presidency. He was laughed out of the gate. "A mechanic wants to advise the president?" A junior officer sneered, waving him off like a beggar. He refused to leave. He stood at that gate for 6 hours, documents clutched to his chest, until word, carried quietly, urgently, finally reached Zara. She, in turn, convinced a retired presidential advisor, a man who still owed her father his career, to examine Tunde's findings in private. 48 hours later, the Economic and Financial Crimes investigators launched a covert inquiry. What they uncovered stopped the nation's celebration cold. Hidden offshore accounts, fabricated international partners, bribed customs officials, a paper trail engineered to survive a surface audit but collapse under real scrutiny. And at the very center of the web, orchestrating it all, Damian Okonkwo, the same man the president had once called the perfect husband for his daughter. Agents intercepted Damian at a private airstrip, boarding pass in hand, a single suitcase of cash beside him 30 minutes before his jet was scheduled to leave the country forever. The story dominated every news cycle for weeks. Damian's father's empire crumbled overnight under the weight of association. Sponsors withdrew, shareholders fled. President Adewale sat alone in his office long after the arrest, replaying every warning his daughter had once given him, warnings he had dismissed as childish emotion. She had been right. He had been blinded, not by malice, but by the seductive shine of wealth, the same shine that had almost cost his country everything. He requested to see Tunde personally. When the young man walked into the presidential office, the memory of his slap under bright chandeliers hung heavy between them. "I owe you an apology," the president said quietly. Tunde's reply was gentle, but it landed harder than any accusation could have. "You owe your daughter one first." The president lowered his eyes. "You've saved my country from disaster. I simply did what every citizen should do." That single sentence humbled the most powerful man in the nation more thoroughly than any editorial ever had. Months passed. Tunde finally launched the idea he'd sketched by lamplight for years, an affordable, locally manufactured electric mobility system engineered specifically for Africa's roads, built with African hands, African materials, African ingenuity. The same investors who had once ignored his emails now competed for meetings. Universities partnered with his growing company, Tuza, Smart Automobiles, a name he had coined from his initials and that of Zara, his now heavily pregnant wife. Young engineers who had fled abroad for opportunity began coming home. Factories rose where empty lots once sat. Thousands found employment. Foreign capital poured into industrial parks that bore his name on the founding plaques, not his father-in-law's. International media coined a phrase for what was happening: the African manufacturing miracle. Within 6 years, Tunde became one of the continent's youngest billionaires. And yet, every single Friday, without exception, without cameras, he still drove to his father's rebuilt, now modern workshop, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with oil, and back in an engine where it all started. Not because he needed to, because he never forgot where greatness actually began. One quiet afternoon, President Adewale arrived unannounced. No motorcade, no security parade, no press, just a father carrying the full weight of quiet regret. He stepped into the modest workshop. The old mechanic looked up beneath a bonnet. "Mr. President." Adewale shook his head slowly. "Not today. Today I'm only a grateful father." He turned to the elderly man. "You raised the man I should have admired from the very beginning." The old mechanic smiled, unbothered by titles. "I only ever taught him one thing." "What's that?" the president asked. "The size of a man's character is never measured by the size of his pocket." The president nodded, something loosening in his chest for the first time in years.
I've spent my whole life studying leadership. Your son taught me humility." He turned to Zara. "My daughter, I'm sorry." Tears fell freely as she embraced him, years of bitterness dissolving in seconds. Finally, he faced Tunde. "I once believed my daughter deserved a wealthy man." He smiled, weary but honest. "I was wrong. She deserved a good man. Wealth simply found him later." Quiet laughter filled the workshop. Outside, young apprentices watched, wide-eyed, as the president of their country sat on an old wooden bench beside a roadside mechanic, discussing engines, innovation, and dreams like two old friends who had always known each other. Someone captured the moment on a phone. It spread across the country within hours, then across the continent within days. Not because it featured the president, but because it reminded an entire nation of something easily forgotten in a world obsessed with titles and appearances. Greatness rarely arrives wearing an expensive suit. Sometimes it comes dressed in grease-stained overalls. Sometimes the richest ideas are born beneath rusting zinc roofs in workshops the world walked past without a second glance. Sometimes the people we mock today become the ones who rebuild tomorrow. And sometimes the greatest investment a nation will ever make is not in powerful families or wealthy names, but in honest people carrying extraordinary character. Because titles can be inherited, money can be lost, power can vanish overnight. But integrity, real, tested, unshakable integrity will always build a future that no amount of corruption can ever tear down. Months later, Tunde and Zara had a beautiful baby boy. The president threw a party, an elaborate one, one that had every big name from the continent and beyond in attendance. Life changed beautifully for Zara and Tunde, and so it will for you if you keep doing the hard work and showing up daily irrespective of the odds stacked against you. Stay strong. Kindly subscribe to my YouTube channel and I will see you in